Gehrig batting. Here's a long fly ball in the right field. It's a homer. Look at that. Babe Ruth dug it home. That puts the Yankees 1 run ahead of the Cubs.
Now, 1919 was Ruth's great year with the Red Sox. I mean, he'd stopped being a pitcher. He was pitching some, helping out, but by the end of July, the Red Sox brought up Waite Hoyt, who was just a young pitcher then, and Waite Hoyt took Ruth's place really in the pitching order, and the transition was made. And this was interesting because Hoyt later joined the Yankees, was a great friend of Ruth's later on. But Ruth, that year, began hitting home runs at a record pace. The old record was, an ancient record of 27, set back in the 1880s. And Ruth moved towards it just inexorably during the season. Hitting 20 home runs was almost unheard of in those years. But Ruth passed 20, went on to 23, 24, 26. I think it was in September, the Red Sox, who had a bad year themselves, they only finished 6th that year, I think, had a doubleheader with the White Sox, and the White Sox were the best team in baseball that season. Tremendous team, great stars all through it. And they had a marvelous pitcher named Lefty Williams. And Williams was pitching against the Red Sox in Fenway Park, and the Babe came up. Tremendous crowd there for Babe Ruth Day. And Ruth hit a home run to left field. Now, a left-handed hitter hitting a home run off a left-handed pitcher to left field was just almost unheard of in that day. It was an exceptional thing. And Ruth not only did it, he did it off this left-handed pitcher who was so good, and he hit a tremendous shot way, way back. It was an amazing home run. So amazing that Buck Weaver, the third baseman of the White Sox, came past the Red Sox dugout and said, "That's the most amazing thing I ever saw in my life." He just couldn't believe it. There's this tremendous home run. Ruth awed even the other players. Now, this was all very interesting because Ruth, in hitting that home run, tied the old record. He broke it a couple of days later. He was going up this way, and the team he was playing that day were the famous Chicago Black Sox, infamous famous Chicago Black Sox, who that year threw the World Series to the Cincinnati Reds. A year later, the scandal broke, and eight of the White Sox were banished from baseball. The White Sox fell down out of the sky, not to celebrate, close to it, or just nothing much after that. So you had this passage, you might say, of Ruth going up and the White Sox going down, all happening this one great day in Boston in September 1919. And then in December that year, and January was the deal that sent Ruth from Boston to New York, and his career just went zoom like that. A year later, Ruth was finishing the 1920 season where with the Yankees he hit 54 home runs to obliterate his old record that he set a year earlier. And the White Sox, late in the season, the scandal broke. The news came out that they had thrown the series in 1919. And this shattered baseball. They were terrified. Some of the clubs felt that they were going to be in great trouble the next year. Attendance would fall off. And in 21, Ruth with the Yankees had his greatest season, even greater than his 1927 season when he had 60 home runs. Just an astonishing year. And all over the league, people would come out to the ballpark to see Ruth and the Yankees, who were on their way, by the way, to their first pennant ever. The first pennant the Yankees ever won was 1921. And Ruth was, of course, the dominant force of the team. And he also was the dominant force in keeping attendance up. Maybe not the only thing, but the dominant thing. And all around the league, were owners who were afraid that the scandal was going to shatter the faith of baseball fans. Loved to see Ruth come in because people came to the ballpark. And if they came once, they'd come again. So that really was the way that Ruth, well, saved baseball is what they say, that Ruth saved baseball. And if he didn't save it himself, he certainly contributed amazingly that year with his home run hitting and the excitement. And he broke his record again. He had 59 home runs, which the phenomenon is just astonishing. You think how many that was in that day before people hit home runs. I mean, even now, this year with all the home runs being hit, 50 home runs is an amazing feat. And Ruth hit 59. 59. So now Ruth's in New York. The Yankees have bought him. He comes to the club. He started out a little bit slowly, then he started to hit, and he had a marvelous year. And fans just poured out to see him. They're playing in the Polo Grounds. The former Major League record for attendance had been set by the Giants, McGraw's Giants, about 10 or 12 years before. They drew something like 910,000. Ruth and the Yankees obliterated that record. They drew, I think, 1,289,000, something like that. But that meant they broke the old record by 25%. They just shattered it. And this made John McGraw very unhappy because this was his ballpark and his city, and the Yankees were taking it over. And that led later on to the departure of the Yankees from the Polo Grounds and the construction of Yankee Stadium. But Ruth, in the Polo Grounds, was drawing these people from all over. His nickname, Bambino, came out of that. This was sort of the apex of the great immigration into this country, and there were many, many people of foreign extraction, still with foreign languages, and a big part of them in New York were Italians. And people would say, how did the Bambino do today? How did the Babe do? And so Bambino, they started to call him, and this got into the headlines, and the Bam went with a bam of a home run. So the headlines would say, Bam hits one, Bambino hits two, things like that. New York really took to Ruth. They loved him. Years and years later, when Roger Maris broke his record, Jimmy Dykes, the old ball player and manager, said, Roger Maris is a fine ball player, a marvelous ball player. He said, but I can't see him driving down Broadway in a low-slung convertible wearing a coonskin coat. That was Ruth. He was on display. Ruth liked the limelight. He liked to be in the public eye. He'd pose for photographers any place. He'd sign autographs. He'd do things. He didn't do it out of a sense of duty so much as a sense of joy. And this was the thing that Ruth had, beyond everything else, beyond his power. He could get mad, he got in fights, he got in quarrels, all that sort of stuff, but he was fun. He was fun to be around, he was fun to watch, and New York loved him. And they poured into that Polo Grounds to watch him, and he became the biggest thing in New York. The Yankees, along with Ruth, had a terrific lineup. They had Bob Musial, who was a very strong outfielder. They had Wally Pipp, the famous old Wally Pipp, whom Lou Gehrig later succeeded at first base. They had a man named Del Pratt playing second base, good, strong ball player. Wally Shang, the catcher. These guys could hit. And the sports writers started calling them Murderers Row, which was a term applied to a very bad part of the city where there are a lot of killings and murders going on. It was called Murderers Row, but they applied that to the Yankees. And later when Gehrig joined them, it really became the name for the Yankees, Murderers Row. And that was Ruth. And Ruth was the biggest murderer of them all because he hit the most home runs. In 1921, the exodus from Boston continued to the Yankees. I mean, Ruth had come down earlier. Oh, the Yankees had gotten Carl Mays from the Red Sox. They got Stuffy McInnis. Now they got Waite Hoyt, the pitcher. Barrow, the Red Sox manager, came to the Yankees and became, in effect, their general manager. They called him secretary, but he was, in effect, the general manager of the club. By the 1923 World Series, I think something like 12 or 13 of the 23 or 24 Yankees, I forget what the number of players was then, had come from the Red Sox. It was really the New York Red Sox that won those pennants. But 1921, nonetheless, the team was getting better and better, and this was their first great year. 1921 was the first year the Yankees won the pennant. They wore white caps that year. The only year they ever wore white caps. They were the men in the white hat. And they went on to win the pennant. Tremendously exciting for New York and for Rupert and for Ruth and for everybody, because the Giants won that year too. So the two New York teams, the old-time Giants and the upstart Yankees, met in the World Series. First of the Subway Series. It became such a big part of New York for the next 30 or 40 years. '23 was a much better year than 1922. It was much more peaceful. '23 was the year Yankee Stadium opened. Houston and Rupert had put their money in. They bought a plot of ground, built this magnificent stadium that was supposed to hold 70,000 people. I think, in truth, it wasn't quite that large, but those are the figures they gave. And opening day, they apparently had 74,000 people jammed into this great ballpark. It's a little different than the outfield. The upper tiers didn't go past the foul pole. Those are bleachers out in right field, which was Ruthville, where Babe lived. This was the house that Ruth built, and that was his town. The fans loved him out there. And Ruth is, before the opening game in the stadium in 1923, Ruth is supposed to have said, I'd give a year of my life to hit the first home run in Yankee Stadium. And by God, he did. He hit the first home run ever hit in Yankee Stadium, which made it a very festive day. Tremendous thing. He had a good year, and Ruth had a great year. He'd sort of reformed after the 22 season. He was called down at a banquet by Jimmy Walker, who later became mayor of New York, saying, oh, those little dirty-faced kids look up to you, and Ruth blubbered and cried and said he reformed, and he tried. He got in pretty good shape. He unreformed later on, but he reformed that year. And he had a tremendous season. He batted .393, only 7 points less than .400. and won the American League batting championship. He led the league in home runs. I think he was second in runs batted in. Ruth never won the Triple Crown, home runs, runs batted in, and batting average, but he won 2 legs of the Triple Crown about 6 or 7 times. Extraordinary. And 23 was really one of his most perfect years. He was named most valuable player. Yankees won the pennant for the 3rd straight year, and they beat the Giants in the World Series 4-2. They really dominated them. It was a great year all around for the Yankees.
In 1928, he had his finest season, hitting .319. Mark batted second in the order, just in front of Ruth. He was on third with a triple when Ruth hit his 60th home run. Here's the famous Yankee infield, from right to left. That's Joe Dugan, Mark Koenig, Tony Lazzari, and Lou Gehrig.
Ruth hit the lofting home runs. Oh, God. Sometimes he'd hit a fly ball in the infield, and if the infielder dropped it, he'd be on third base. That's how high he'd hit those. I saw him hit a ball in Atlanta, Georgia, off George Bowler, I think his name was. My God, what a drive. It went over boxcars and everything else in right field. If you ever was in Atlanta ballpark, it had a great big, big fence on top of a bank, and then boxcars in back of the, they switched boxcars. And went over the boxcars. Oh, what a drive. Yeah, but Gehrig hit line drive home runs, they'd take off and rise. Benny Bendigo and I had an apartment on 181st Street in Broadway, I forget the name of the street. But Gehrig had come over and visit us when we were at home almost every day. He, like I say, he used to come over 2 or 3 times during the week while we were at home. And I never, he was so bashful, a bashful type of guy, and we tried to fix him up with, like I say, get a girlfriend for him. But I don't see how he ever got married. It was a surprise to me. Very, very quiet kid. Yeah. Had a nice, contagious smile, very nice smile.
Lou Dugan and I saw him when I went to Old Timers Day last summer, the Yankee Stadium. But Dugan is 80 years old, and he puts it on a little bit, and Dugan used, when he raised a glass to have a drink, he'd say, "We'll never see a sorry day." Of course, he was a graduate of Holy Cross, and he was the funniest guy in the world, and he still is, for that matter. And it happened, there used to be a book or something, or a song or something that happens every spring, Well, we were in Asheville, North Carolina, and the phone rang one morning, and Dugan was a great friend of Ruth's. He was closer to Ruth than I ever was. I wasn't that close to Babe. In fact, I had a fight with him, that fist fight. And Dugan said, "It's the big guy." And I said, "What does he want?" He said, "He wants to know if he can take 1,500. Meaning, can Dugan lower him 1,500? He said, "You willing to sail for 750? And I said, "Yeah, all right, I'll go for 750. And so he told Ruth, "All right." He said, "We'll send the checks up to you." So Dugan said, write a check and make it out to Babe Ruth for $750. So, which I did, and so did he. We sent the checks up, and Babe borrowed $1,500. But you see, Ruth, being a great financial genius,
Right.
When he'd come around and pay you, he'd always pay you. He'd always pay you. And he'd come around and he'd pay you $1,500 out of his first pay or second pay, and he'd give you what he owed you, but he'd also give you 5% because he'd heard that was the thing to do. When you borrowed money, you had to pay interest on it. So he'd give you 5% interest. Well, you had a hard time convincing him that that wasn't necessary, but nevertheless, he insisted on giving you 5%. But by the reverse token, if you borrowed money from Ruth, you could borrow maybe $100 from him, or $200, or whatever it was necessary. And Lazzari used to borrow a lot of money from Ruth, because Lazzari, our second baseman, his wife used to run the budget, see? And when we go on the road for 3 weeks, she'd portion out so much money for Tony to use, and he couldn't get by on the money she was loaning, giving him, so he used to borrow money from Babe. But if you borrowed $200 from Babe and came around and said, here's that $100 I owe you, he'd say, thanks, fine, thanks. He'd forget how much you borrowed from him.
No interest when you borrowed it from him?
No, and then he'd forget the amount.
Oh. So it was a deal to borrow it from him?
Well, yeah, if you wanted to.
Did you ever have to borrow any from Ruth?
No.
It's time to leave the Browns and join the Yankees. It's St. Petersburg, and that's Wade Hoyt, Sam Jones, and Bob Shalkey. Tony Lazzari, star infielder, takes a healthy cut. And of course, there's the Bay. Ruth often trained in heavy clothes to take off weight. Nick Cullip and the Babe in close-up as we wind up.
Even though the Yankees began to look good late in the 25 season, they did finish 7th. And the sports writers figured they weren't going to be any good in 1926. They had a good spring training. In fact, Huggins, it was the best spring training Huggins ever had, because Ruth was behaving and these young players looked good and all the rest of it. But the sports writers figured the Yankees weren't going to do anything. But the Yankees, when they broke training camp, they went on the road with the Brooklyn Dodgers, then known as the Brooklyn Robins after their manager, Wilbert Robinson. And they played them, I think, a dozen or 15 games, something like that, all the way up through the small towns of the South as they made their way back to New York. And the Yankees beat them the first game, beat them the second game, beat them the third game. And Ruth was coming back in a cab with Wade Hoyt and another player from the ballpark. And Ruth said, if we keep beating these guys, he said, we're going to win the pennant. And the Yankees went on and they beat the Dodgers. They beat the Dodgers every game they played, and they finished the spring training exhibition season by winning 16 straight. And they went to the season on that glow. They still weren't picked by anybody, but they had a terrific year. And they won the pennant. They won 91 games, and they won the pennant, and they went to the World Series as the big favorites against the St. Louis Cardinals. So from nothing, they came back, and they had that great year. Even though they were a reviving team, there was still that doubt. And at the baseball writers' dinner before the season, or in the midwinter, one of the parody songs, and I don't know what the song was, I have the lyrics though, they wrote about Ruth and the way he behaved. And this was done by one of the sports writers pretending to be Miller Huggins, the manager. And he says, I wonder where my Babe Ruth is tonight. He grabbed his hat and coat and ducked from sight. I wonder where he'll be at 2:30 or 3. He may be at a dance or in a fight. He may be at some cozy roadside inn. He may be drinking tea or maybe gin. I know he's with a dame. I wonder what's her name. I wonder where my Babe Ruth is tonight. But Babe Ruth behaved in 1926. He may still have been with dames, but he behaved. And he had a terrific year again. He hit, I think, 46 home runs, and they won the pennant.
One of the fellas that was uncanny in that sense was Ruth. And we played the Dodgers on the way up, and we had a very bad spring training. Lazzari had joined the club, and we hardly won any exhibition games at all until we started on the exhibition trip north, which took two weeks, and we played about 14 games on the way north. So we got to Montgomery, Alabama, and we had beaten the Dodgers about 5 or 6 straight now. And so now we played in Montgomery, Alabama, and Pennock pitched against them and beat them 3-2. But the way the game was won, Ruth hit a home run way up over some distant fence. And we were going back to the hotel in a cab after the game, and Babe, in that guttural tone of voice and his inimitable language, I can't use the language, but he says, hey, he says, you know, he said, gee whiz, he said, we keep on beating these guys. If we beat these guys 16 straight or whatever, 12 straight, we beat them every game, he says, you know, we'll win the pennant. Well, nobody believed him, see, and it was a big ha-ha. But at any rate, we did beat them every game. And we did win the pennant.
And now opening day. Yankee Stadium, Ruth belts one, but it's just a single. The The Yanks are playing the Red Sox, and Ruth is about to come in to score. There he comes with the first run of the ball game. The power pair of the Yanks, Ruth and Gary. Here's something you may not have seen before. The Babe, who generally anchored one all the way, tags a drive to right center and settles for 3 bases. Lou Gehrig doesn't want to make his friend run, so he bangs it into the bleachers. That's Larrap and Lou rounding third with Babe waiting at the plate. The Yanks won the pennant, and Ruth and company faced the Cards in the World Series.
And that year, 26, we won the pennant the first year I was up. It was kind of a struggle, but we won it.
This is Bill Slater with news shots from our sports album showing high spots of the 1926 Yanks Cards World Series. Here's a part of the crowd walking toward Yankee Stadium. Well, walk. The series went all the way, 7 games. These kids caught the opener. That's the last straw. Tired after their hike, they settle down for the game. Card manager Roger Hornsby, the Yankees Miller Huggins. In the stands is Landis. Everybody shakes hands. Even Junior wants to get in the act. The Yankees pin their opening hopes on hurler Herb Pennock. 3 aces of the Cards, Bill Shardell, Reinhardt, and Flint Rem. And it's Wee Willie Shardell selected to start. Key inning in the opener. And who starts it off? Why, the Babe, Natch. Now watch this, fellas. Shardell pitches. The Babe connects. It's a bullet to center. No homer this time, just a single. The stands see Bob Musial sacrifice, with Babe bearing down to second on the bunt. Now Lou Gehrig connects. It's a single, but Babe Ruth tears in from second with the run that beats the Cards, 2-1.
Before Game 2 at Yankee Stadium, the Cardinal pitching staff poses for the newsreels. The story of the day was old man Grover Cleveland Alexander, who pitched a complete game, striking out 10 Yankees and retiring the last 21 batters in succession. Urban Shocker won 7 innings for the Yankees and gave up 5 runs. The Cardinals won 6-2, sending the series back to St. Louis, even at 1 game apiece. Jess Haynes tosses a masterful 5-hit shutout, here striking out Mark Koenig. Outfielder Chick Haffey doubles and later scores. While Jess Haynes helps his own cause with a 2-run homer off Dutch Ruther in the 4th. And the surprising Cardinals now lead the series 2-1.
St. Louis, the 4th game. Here comes the Babe. And there goes the ball. Somebody gets a souvenir. And Babe gets the longest home run ever hit in St. Louis. This is the game in which Ruth got 3 homers and the Cards got a headache.
He'd homered in the 1st and now again in the 3rd, both times on the very first pitch. Ruth had never hit 3 home runs in a game before, and no one had ever done it in the World Series. His 3rd dinger bounced over the outer wall and came to rest outside the park. An enthusiastic Joe Dugan jumped on Ruth's back, and the series was now knotted at 2. The newsreel cameras capture the 2 dugouts before the start of pivotal Game 5. Here is the only known footage of the famous Murderers Row dugout. Tony Lazzari sits next to Earl Combs, then Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth beside him. That's Joe Dugan standing, Bob Musial hiding in the back. Seated are Pat Collins and Mark Koenig signing a baseball. pitchers: Herb Pennock, Urban Shocker, Dutch Ruther, George Pipgrass, and Bob Shockey on the dugout steps. "40,000 enthusiastic Cardinal fans packed the ballpark for the start of Game 5. Sherdell versus Pennock, the rematch from Game 1. Top of the first, Sherdell gets Mark Koenig and then Babe Ruth to ground out. Right fielder Billy Southworth singles off a Pennock, then steals second. Hornsby grounds back to Pennock, who flips to Gehrig for the out. Southworth moves over to third. But Bottomley grounds to Lazzari at second, who throws to Gehrig, and the Cardinals are retired. With one out, Lou Gehrig singles. The next batter, Tony Lazzari, singles, and Gehrig races to third, sliding in ahead of the throw. But Joe Dugan grounds into a double play, Hornsby to Bottomley, and the game remains scoreless. First baseman Jim Bottomley doubles. Third baseman Les Bell singles, and the Cards go up 1-0, to the joy of the roaring crowd. Pitcher Herb Pennock doubles to left, where Haffey loses it in the sun. Earl Combs walks. And Mark Koenig's single drives in Pennock to tie the game at 1. Ruth goes down swinging. Musial sacrifices Coombs over to third. Gehrig walks to load the bases. But Lazzari flies out to right field to end the inning. Bottom of the 7th, Les Bell doubles. Catcher Barbo Farrell singles him in, and the Cards lead 2-1, to the joy of the enthusiastic crowd. Gehrig doubles, then Lazzari beats out a bunt. Now, with runners on first and third, pinch hitter Ben Peschel singles, and Gehrig scores to tie the game at 2. Pennock's grounder forces catcher Severide at second. But in the 10th, the Yankees put the game away. Koenig leads off with a single and moves to second on a wild pitch. Ruth walks, and Musial sacrifice bunt moves both runners over. Gehrig is intentionally walked to load the bases. Lazzari's fly to left allows Koenig to score the winning run.
Sixth game, starting pitchers Alexander and Shockey. And Alex the Great means to win it, starting from scratch. Alexander burns them in before the game. And here we go. With 2 on and the Cards up, Bottomley, Cards' first sacker, doubles to left, scoring Billy Southworth, moving Hornsby to third. Now Bell singles. Hornsby and Bottomley score, and the Cards win 10-2.
With the Cardinals up 3-0, Bob Musial led off the bottom of the 4th with a triple. He would later score to cut the lead to 3-1. In the 7th inning, Thevenot leads off with a single. Alexander lays down a bunt, and Lazzari, covering first, drops the ball. Home bunted, but Severide to Dugan nails the runner at third. Southworth doubles to center, and Alexander can be seen racing home in that heavy wool sweater. Shocker replaced Chalky on the mound, but Hornsby's single drove in two more. And Les Bell hit a two-run homer to finish out the 10-2 victory.
It was a very indefinite year. Gehrig was playing now, and this was the first year of the new ball club with Lazzeri at second and Koenig at short and Dugan at third and Musil in left and Combs in center and Babe in right, and the catching was still Benny Bengoff and Grabowski and these fellows. And I think Hank Severoid joined us then, I'm not sure. And the pitching was fairly good, and we did win the pennant, but that's the year that Alexander struck out Lazzeri with the bases filled. It struck him out with the bases filled in the seventh inning. And I was the losing pitcher in the game. Jesse Haynes up here in Ohio beat me 3-2. And our club, which was not prone to do this kind of thing, made 3 errors in 1 inning. And,
wow.
and they scored 3 runs in the 1 inning off me. And I think I really think that I'd have shut them out without those 3 errors. But nevertheless, that what you think and what is so are two different things.
The series tied at 3 games each, and here's the payoff match. Jess Haynes slated to go for the Cards against the Yankees' boy wonder, Wade Hoyt. Hoyt loosens up the money muscles. He's ready. They're ready. Well, let's go. Bottomley at bat in the 4th. It's a hit. Southworth up, and he's safe on Mark Koenig's fumble. Then the crowd sees Hafey's pop drop. O'Farrell flies to Musil. Bottomley scores after the catch. Tommy Thevenot slams a safety. 2 more are in, and the Cards win the game 3-2 in the series for that period.
And I had in the first World Series, I blew it. I lost the series with I booted a double play ball, and they beat us 4-3 the last ball game, 4 games to 3.
Man, oh man, that 7th game. I wasn't in the big leagues then. So when the Cards weren't playing in St. Louis, I hung around the store where there was a radio out in front. That was the first World Series broadcast on a national network, you know. And I didn't miss a single play.
We have the starting pitchers for the 7th game, the game that will decide the series and give the World's Championship either to St. Louis or New York. For the Yankees, Wade Hoyt, and for the Cardinals, Jess Haynes. Haynes, you will remember, won the 3rd game for the Cardinals. And now that Alexander has won 2 games for the Cards in this series, Haynes will try for his 2nd. It's the last half of the 3rd now, and the great Babe Ruth is at the plate facing Haynes. The pitch, Ruth fouls a towering fly ball. It's going, yes, it's a home run. And the Bambino tossed around the bases, making the score 1-0 in favor of the New York Yankees. Now there's 1 out in the 1st of the 4th with Sonny Jim Bottomley out. It's a base hit. Bottomley holds up at first. Les Bell swings. Shortstop Koenig bobbles it, and Bell's safe at first. And Hafey singles to left, loading the bases and bringing up the catcher, Bob O'Farrell. The Cardinals are trailing by a run. The bases are loaded. A base hit now could put them ahead. Even a long fly could tie it up. The pitch, O'Farrell swings, a long high fly into left. Bottomley should be able to score after the catch. Bussell drops it. He lost it in the sun. Bottomley scores. The ball game tied up 1-1. There's Hoyt's pitch to Tommy Thevenot, and it's a clean single for the Cardinal shortstop. Here comes Bell across the plate. Chick Hafey scoring 2, and the Cardinals are out in front 3-1. And now it's Jess Haynes coming to the plate. Listen to that crowd. To the thousands of St. Louis fans in New York today, he's a great hero. And even the Yankee fans have to admit he's pitching a terrific game as...
I tell you, we were so excited there on the radio we could hardly stand still. But all the time, old Alexander was sitting out in the bullpen under the bleachers in Yankee Stadium, calmly watching a couple of pitchers warm up. But even when the Yankees scored another run in the sixth, nobody was worried. Everybody felt sure Haynes could hang on to a one-run lead. But then in the seventh, something went wrong.
Looks like something's wrong with Jess Haynes. He's getting wild. There's ball 4 to Lou Gehrig, moving Musel to second, leaving Combs on third. The bases are loaded as push-em-up Tony Lazzeri comes to the plate. Hornsby's going over to talk to Haynes. This Lazzeri is a dangerous hitter. They're looking at Haynes' fingers. He may have a blister. He's been puffing hard all day. Hornsby's calling for another pitcher. It'll probably be Shadell or... No, Alexander's coming in. Listen to that crowd. Alexander pitched only yesterday, and he wasn't even warming up out there. There he is talking to Hornsby and pitcher Bobby Farrell. I wonder if a pitcher ever walked into a tighter situation. Bases loaded, one of the league's leading hitters at the plate, and a World Series at stake. What a moment this is. This crowd's going wild. Alexander's taking warm-up. He looks relaxed and easy. As a matter of fact, he looks like he's the calmest man in Yankee Stadium. Now Lazzeri is stepping into the batter's box, waving that big bat. Alexander winds. Curveball, strike one. Lazzeri had a home run cut on that one. O'Farrell's out talking to Alexander. One pitch could mean the ball game here. Now he goes back to the plate. Alexander's ready. Holmes takes the lead off third base. The pitch. It's a long fly ball into left field. It could be. It's foul. That ball went into the stands just barely to the left of the foul line marker, making it strike 2 on Tony Lazzeri and leaving no doubt where he wants to hit that ball. Alexander gets a new ball from the plate umpire, Bill Deneen. He takes his side. The pitch. Strike 3. Lazzeri goes down swinging in a curveball, retiring the side. Ladies and gentlemen, you should hear this crowd and see the Cardinals gather around Grover Cleveland Alexander. Needs to be the oldest pitcher ever to pitch a complete World Series game. Today, the hero of heroes, the Cardinal of Cardinals.
1926 was a really delightful year for the Yankees because they came back, they coalesced as a team, and they played well. It was a great year in New York, too. In September, the first Dempsey-Tunney fight took place in the Polo Grounds. Dempsey had been the champion since 1919. Tunney was the younger guy coming up. Dempsey was a prohibitive favorite, as I recall from my reading. Something like 120,000 people crammed into the Polo Grounds in the stands and in seats on the field and the rest of it to watch this thing. And Tunney upset Dempsey, one of the great upsets in sporting history, which upset Ruth because Ruth was a Dempsey fan. He liked the guys that could hit. Dempsey was sort of a pal of his. It was a momentous occasion in that year, certainly for New York and for sports and for baseball.
That a bat of tremendous proportions was made for him and presented by Jack Dempsey. The balls that bounced off the fat end of his bat brought league championships and World Series to his Yankees.
The Yankees, it was such a satisfactory year because Gehrig, in his first full season at first base, came into his own. He hit home runs, he drove in runs. Tony Lazzeri, the rookie second baseman, had even better year than Gehrig. He had 2 home runs more than Lou, and he had batted in 7 runs more than Lou, so he was a big factor too. Lazzeri was tremendously popular in New York with this big Italian population. Tony had this great nickname, Push 'em Up Tony Lazzeri, and that was because theoretically those Italians who had not yet learned English would say, oh, push 'em up Tony, hit him into the stands that way. So that was part of the humor of the time, ethnic humor. But they had a great year, and in the series, they were upset by the Cardinals in 7 games in one of the memorable World Series. The Cardinals won their first pennant ever. They only won 89 games and won the pennant. They just weren't supposed to be in the league with the Yankees. The Yankees really should have won the pennant. They came back into the stadium after the 5 games had been played with a 3-2 game lead. They lost the last 2 games in the stadium. They lost the second game of the series to Grover Cleveland Pete Alexander, great Hall of Fame pitcher near the end of his career. They lost the 6th game in the stadium to Alexander, and then in the 7th game, baseball fans everywhere know about Alexander stopping the Yankees by striking out Lazzeri with the bases loaded in the 7th inning. Joe McCarthy, who later became the Yankees manager, kind of contributed to the Yankees' defeat that year. He was managing the Cubs in Chicago, and Alexander was one of his pitchers. But Alexander was old, and he was drinking, and he was not very dependable, and McCarthy got rid of him. He didn't want him. McCarthy was trying to build his own ball club, and he did, because he won the pennant in 1929 with him. But nonetheless, he got rid of Alexander, who was supposed to be washed up, and Branch Rickey, the genius who ran the Cardinals, picked him for the Cardinals. Hornsby was managing, but Rickey was the guy who really knew the club. And Alexander, I think, won 9 games for the Cardinals in the last 2 months of the season. It was instrumental in winning the pennant, and then in the series, he really was the one who stopped the Yankees. He was the star of the series. The 7th game, the one where he struck out Lazzeri, was one of the memorable games in World Series history, because I think Mark Koenig at shortstop and Musial in left field both made errors in the same inning, which gave the Cardinals the runs and put them ahead 3-2, and the Yankees couldn't get back. In the 7th inning, they got the bases loaded. Lazzeri was up, and everyone thought, here we go. And Alexander came in from the bullpen to pitch to the rookie right-hander. One of those tremendous moments that baseball has. The 23-year-old rookie, the 39-year-old veteran, the powerful Yankees, really the upstart Cardinals. And I think the count was 1-1. And Alexander threw a pitch inside, and Lazzeri swung and hit this tremendous drive to left field that went foul by a few feet. Almost a grand slam home run, but it was just a loud foul, and he struck out in the next pitch. Alexander then retired 1-2-3 in the 8th, and 9th he got the first 2 batters, and then Ruth came up and Alexander walked him. Still pitching very carefully to the babe. Gehrig was up, and Ruth is in first base, and Musial, I forget whether Musial was ahead of Gehrig. I think Musial was up and Gehrig was on deck, 2 big hitters, and Ruth decided to steal second base. Then he was thrown out, and the game was over, the series was over, and Ruth, despite hitting 3 home runs in 1 game in that series, was the GOAT of the series. Though some say it was a smart play, trying to upset Alexander, getting in second base, but nonetheless, Ruth made the last out of the series. Very strange, abrupt end to a very strange season. That 7th game of the 26 World Series really hurt the Yankees. I mean, Ruth hit a home run to give them a 1-0 lead, and then the errors cost them 3 runs, and it was a letdown after a terrific season. And it may have been one of the reasons why they had such a great year in 1927, just a determination to prove that nothing went wrong. They began the season in high gear, and they never slowed up. They took the lead, and they held it. They just obliterated the opposition. Everybody played well.
Nobody liked the 27 Yankees. That's the best ball club ever that I can ever remember. Can you imagine today seeing Gehrig on first base, Lazzeri on second, Mark Koenig at short, Joe Dugan at third, Bob Musial in left field, Coons in center field, and Ruth in right field, and 5 pitchers who won 18 or better every year? You could, lie in bed and press the button and manage that club.
The 1927 season was a runaway for the Yankees, but what was exciting, what took up the slack, was the home run race. Ruth had really been unchallenged as the home run leader through all his earlier years. The only time he lost was in 1922 and 25, when he was suspended in 22 and sick in 25, so he didn't win, but it really wasn't a race that time. In 27, he was challenged for the first time by Gehrig. Gehrig had only hit 20 home runs in 1925 and 16 in 26, but in 27 he matched Ruth's pace for the first several months of the season. And this was a strange thing. People always equate Ruth and Gehrig, the home run twins, but Gehrig was just a kid. At the beginning of the 27 season, he was only 23 years old. Ruth was into his 30s. Ruth had been a major leaguer for, this is probably his 12th or 13th season. This was Gehrig's 2nd full season as a Yankee first baseman. So it was the old veteran and the young rookie, really, instead of the twins. But Gehrig matched him, game for game, homer for home run. In fact, in the middle of August, he was 3 home runs ahead of Ruth, 38-35, I think. Then Lou slowed down. He still looked as if he was in the race because he was close to the end of August, but he only hit 9 home runs the rest of the season, and he finished with 47, whereas Ruth started to hit home runs at an increasingly accelerating pace from the middle of August to the end. He hit He hit 25 home runs in the last 6 weeks of the season, one of the most extraordinary streaks in baseball history. And he kept moving it up. Towards the end of the year, I mean, by this time Gary was out of the race, the question was, would Ruth match his old record of 59? He said, I think I'll break the record. But with the 12 games to go, I think he still needed 10 home runs. Maybe it was 10 home runs he needed in 12 games to go, something, whatever it was. He hit a few, then he missed a game or two, hit another. But with 4 games to go, he was still 4 home runs back. Then he hit one. Then he hit another one that game. And then he hit his 59th. With the 3 games to go in the season. And then it was the second to last game of the season. They were playing Washington here in the stadium, facing a left-handed pitcher, Tom Zachary. And Ruth lifted a fly ball down this right field line. It sort of way down the line, and it reached the seats, but it wasn't one of his Ruthian blasts. It was a very close home run. They didn't have the foul poles. Oh, that's a problem. Didn't have the foul poles going up to the thing then. It was an umpire's decision. The umpire ruled it fair, and Zachary complained it was a foul ball, it was a foul ball. But it was a fair ball, it was a home run, and Ruth ran around the bases just delighted, and came into the clubhouse afterwards saying, 60 home runs, 60, count them, let some other son of a bitch match that. That's how excited he was. Years later, when he was dying of cancer, he met Tom Zachary at some old-timers thing, and in his very heavy, humorous way, but kidding, he said to Zachary, you crooked left-hander, he said, you're not still calling that ball foul, are you? He remembered it all those years later, 20 years later. But that was the 60th home run, and that was big news. 60 home run. It was very important to him, to do that, because his first years, he said he broke his record each year, and then all of a sudden he stopped breaking the record. Now he came back and did it. Extraordinary.
When Ruth hit his 60th home run, Tom Zachary was the pitcher, and in that game, Zachary had made up his mind he wasn't going to give Ruth a good pitch to hit all day long. Ruth had singled and scored twice in the game, and the score was 2-2 in the 8th inning. Ruth came up, and Zachary ran the count to 1-1 on Ruth, and he decided he's going to move Ruth back from the plate. So he tried to throw him a curveball knee high, and instead of stepping off the plate, Ruth kind of lunged at the ball, stepped into it, and hit it right down the foul line in right field, and just 10 feet fair, and that was home run number 60. On the mound, Zachary tossed his glove down and was yelling, foul ball, but it wasn't a foul ball.
First game in Pittsburgh. Starting for the Yankees, Waite Hoyt. For Pittsburgh, Ray Kramer. Miller Huggins, Yankee manager, who'll guide his team in the contests. Huggins and Pirate pilot Donnie Bush. The Yankees slugging first baseman, baseball's immortal Lou Gehrig. And of course, the all-time home run king, Babe Ruth. Those Yankee cleanup hitters, Ruth and Gehrig. Pittsburgh's 1-2 punch, the Wainers, Lloyd and Paul. Pirate hurler, Ray Kramer. Pittsburgh's pitcher, Aldridge, is ready to warm up in case he's needed. Better loosen up, Mr. Aldridge. Those Yankees have power. Star of the Yankee hurling staff, Waite Hoyt. Hoyt, a Brooklyn schoolboy who hopped to the big leagues on one bounce, gets his salary wing underway for the opener. Here's his hook. The dean of baseball, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis at the ballpark. Okay, mates, let's get this game going. Wait a minute. Hey, it's Nick Altrock and Al Shack. Hey, fellas, you're in the wrong racket. Cut it out. Wrong sports. No, not that either. Nick, Al, there's no fight today. You want to fight? Pay your way in. New York's mayor, James J. Walker. Here are flashes from the first game. Yankee power breaks loose, and New York cups the opener 5-4.
1927, I was up, I got 9 out of 18 base hits, a couple of doubles, and I don't know how many runs I scored, but all I know is we annihilated them.
Were they good, the stars? Who were the stars of the Pittsburgh team?
Well, they had the 2 Wainer brothers, and they had supposedly had a great pitching staff with Kramer and Aldridge, I think. Aldridge, his name was. And they had another guy that I should write him a letter because he wrote me a letter. He's over 90 years old. He's the last surviving member of the Pittsburgh team that played us in that series, and I'm the last one of the Yankees. He's a pitcher. Now, I can't think of his name right now.
But the Wainer brothers were the stars of that team.
Oh, yeah.
They good ball
Wainer
players?
brothers, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then they had Pie Trainer and Glenn Wright, shortstop, a hell of a shortstop, Pie Trainer.
Did you guys play better at Yankee Stadium than on the road? Was there a feeling like this is our ballpark, we own this place?
We played good at every park. Yeah, you had to play good to win 119 ball games.
But was there a...
We always started the season against Boston. We beat them 4 or 5 straight ball games and get off to a lead, you know. Never relinquish it.
In 1927, most Americans' only glimpse of the World Series came at their local movie theaters, months after the series was over. A 20-minute montage of the news of the day, known as the newsreel, was usually shown before the feature film. There was no narration, but the local organist might add some music to set the mood. Here is how it might look. Game 1, top of the first. After Coombs flied out, Koenig struck out. Then Ruth lines a single to right. Gehrig triples to right on a short fly ball as Paul Wainer misses a shoestring catch, and the ball bounces past him. The Yanks are on the board, 1-0. Bottom of the first. Lloyd Wainer is on first base, having been hit by a pitch, when brother Paul doubles down the right field line, sending Lloyd to third. The next batter, Glenn Wright, flies to center, as Lloyd races home with the Pirates' first run. Top of the third. With one out, Koenig reaches on an error. Ruth then singles to right, and Koenig races to third. Gehrig eventually walks, loading the bases. Musial fouls off several pitches, but walks as well, forcing Koenig in with a run. Lazzari grounds into a force play, but Ruth scores from third. The Yanks take a 4-1 lead into the bottom of the third. The Pirates would rebound with a run in their half of the third, making the score 4-2. Here, a Pittsburgh player has the wind knocked out of him after a collision at second base. Yankee infielders gather around to aid the fallen Pirate as the trainer races over. The teams would trade runs in the fifth inning. The Yanks held a 5-3 lead going into the bottom of the eighth. After 2 Pirate singles, we'll see Moore replaced Wade Hoyt on the mound. Moore would allow only 1 hit and 1 run, and the Yanks won the opener 5-4. Bottom of the first, Lloyd Wainer triples down the third base line off George Pipgrass. Joe Dugan applies the tag, but Wainer is safely on the base. Bernhardt flies to Ruth and right, and Wainer races home with the run. As the inning ends, you can see Gehrig toss his mitt on the grass, a common practice in the 1920s. Top of the third, Coombs led off with a single. Koenig follows with a single of his own. When Paul Wainer misplays the ball, Koenig races all the way to third. Coombs races home, tying the game. Ruth's sacrifice fly to center scores Koenig, and the Yanks lead 2-1. After Gehrig doubled, Musial singled, and the Yanks now led 3-1. In the fourth, Pie Traynor doubles to center, but was left stranded. George Pipgrass pitched a masterful game, and the Yanks won 6-2.
Back home at Yankee Stadium for the third contest after taking the second one at Pittsburgh, Babe Ruth gets his eye on the right field stand.
Ruth, Gehrig, and Huggins posed with baseball dignitaries before the start of Game 3. The Yankees were relaxed and confident with their 2-game lead. The fans anxiously anticipated Ruth breaking out with the series' first home run, and the Babe rarely disappointed. Gehrig appeared relaxed, but was actually sick with worry, for his mother lay in a New York hospital recovering from an operation. Huggins, a nervous man by nature, was extremely confident. Murderer's Row didn't wait long to explode. Bottom of the first, Coombs and Koenig singled. Standing in the on-deck circle, Gehrig told bat boy Eddie Bennett, "Here's where I hit one for Ma." Lou then smacked a shot to deep left field for a triple, which he attempted to stretch into an inside-the-park home run. He was gunned down at the plate, but not before the Yanks had put the first 2 runs across. In the bottom of the 7th, Ruth smacked a 3-run home run, which capped a 6-run inning, and the Yanks had a whopping 8-0 lead. But the real story of the day was Herb Pennock, who pitched a perfect game into the 8th inning. He finished with a 2-hitter, and the Yanks won 8-1. A packed crowd of 60,000 jammed Yankee Stadium to see if the Bronx Bombers could complete the sweep. It was the 4th game in 4 days. The Pirates had barely blinked before finding themselves down 3 games and facing elimination. Game 3 stars Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth were interviewed. Both seemed relaxed and confident. And 30-year-old rookie Wilcie Moore got the start. He had split the year between starting and the bullpen, where he led the league in saves. Lloyd Wainer led the game off by bouncing a single off Moore's glove. Bernhardt grounded out to Koenig at short as Wainer moved to second. Paul Wainer then grounded to Dugan at third, forcing brother Lloyd to hold at second. Wright singled in Wainer before Traynor grounded out to end the inning, but Pittsburgh was on the board. The Yanks tied the score in the bottom of the first. Now in the 5th, Earl Combs led off with a single. Ruth steps up and cracks a towering home run deep into the right field bleachers. As they circle the bases, you can see Coombs clapping his hands. Gehrig waits at home plate and affectionately taps Ruth with his bat. In the tradition of the day, the fans salute Ruth by waving their white hankies in appreciation. Pittsburgh held the Yankees scoreless over the next few innings. Here, Lou Gehrig, Bob Musial, and Joe Dugan are all retired on ground balls. Wilcie Moore had his sinker ball working all day long, but 2 Yankee errors in the 7th, one by Moore and one by Lazzari, opened the door for 2 Pirate runs, and the game was tied at 3. Yankee catcher Pat Collins went 3 for 3, but his teammates failed to drive him in even once. The score remained tied going into the bottom of the 9th. 5 o'clock lightning struck just as it had all year long. Earl Coombs walked on 4 pitches. Mark Koenig beat out a sacrifice bunt. Ruth stepped into the box to the roar of the crowd. Pitcher John Milgis reared back and uncorked a wild pitch, and the runners moved up. Now Ruth is intentionally walked to the boos of 60,000 strong. Lou Gehrig steps up with the bases loaded, but Milgis strikes him out. He then gets Bob Musial to strike out as well. Now Tony Lazzari walks up. Deja vu from a year ago, when Lazzari faced Alexander. The crowd goes wild as Lazzari fouls one off. In the Yankee dugout, Miller Huggins paces. That fellow is bearing down too hard. It isn't in the cards for him to get away with it. If Tony doesn't hit one, he'll wild pitch. The words barely out of Huggins' mouth when Milgis uncorked a sailor that tipped off Gooch's mitt and bounced all the way to the backstop. Coombs raced in from third, and the World Series was over. The Yanks were world champions, and for the first time, a team had swept the World Series. In 1928, they would do it all over again. And here is how the newsreel clips remember that game. The narration was added in the 1960s for television.
In the 1927 World Series, Wilcie Moore pitched for the Yankees and Carmen Hill for the Pirates. Judge Landis and Colonel Jake Rupert were on hand. That was the year the Babe knocked out 60 home runs, and the Yankees won the series in 4 straight games.
The Yanks win, and trying for 4 straight, they call on Wilcie Moore. Moore loosens up for his big assignment as 60,000 fans look on. In an effort to salvage one game, Pittsburgh picks pitcher Carmen Hill. The 5th inning in a Yankee rally. With Earl Coombs on base, up comes the Babe. Hill throws, Ruth swings. It's a homer, it's in the stands. It's the Yankees winning the 4th and final game 4-3 to sweep the series in 4 straight.
You guys played Pittsburgh and you swept them 4 games to none.
Yeah.
Was there a lot of confidence on the team that we were going to go in there and win?
Well, I don't know. We always had confidence, but I don't know. I know Wayner, he said that we could hit around the team that Koenig beat us.
So when you think back on the 2017, what do you remember most about the team? Why do you think they were such a special team?
Well, because they were all good friends. They were all pulling together. There was no dissension. And they were all, most of them, great ball players. The statistics show it that they were great ball players. And there was, like I say, no dissension. They're all good friends.
What New York story would be complete without an appearance by the mighty Babe Ruth? Yankee games didn't start till 3 p.m., so Ruth, the actor, had plenty of time to film his scenes in the morning before heading to the ballpark. The Babe appeared in a half a dozen films during the 1920s. At this point in the story, Speedy is now a cab driver. Here he takes the Babe on a wild ride through the busy New York streets.
In 1928 was a strange year because the Yankees came off that great 27 season and they started out in 28 exactly the same way. They tore the league apart. They had a 13 and a half game lead by the 1st of July, and Ruth was hitting home runs at a furious pace. As I said, more than he had in 27, 41 home runs by the beginning of August. But the Yankees were hit by injuries, bad injuries. Koenig was out for 20 games or so. Lazzeri was out for more than that. Dugan was out for more than that. Their infield was just decimated, and the Yankees slumped. And the Philadelphia Athletics, this rising team, came on with a rush. This was a tremendous ball club. This is proved by going on to win 3 straight pennants beginning in 29. And the Yankee lead just disappeared. And in early September, the A's took over first place and came into New York for a 4-game series to play the Yankees. And this was really the crux of the pennant race. Began with a doubleheader here in the stadium on a Sunday, and the Yankees beat the Athletics twice, 5-0 and I think 7-3, something like that. And the next day, the score was tied around the 7th or 8th inning, and Ruth popped a home run into the right field stands to win that game. And Ruth said afterwards, we broke their hearts, and they swept 4 straight games. The Athletics were out of the race, and the Yankees went on to win their 3rd straight pennant, and then swept the Cardinals in the World Series that year. Ruth hit 3 home runs in one game for the 2nd time against the Cardinals, and it was kind of fascinating. It was against a pitcher named Willie Sherdell, who was a left-hander, and Ruth hit a homer in one of the early innings. Now he came up in I guess it was the 7th inning, and Sherdell got 2 strikes on him, and Ruth was always talking at the plate, and he turned to say something to the catcher whom he knew, and Sherdell quick pitched him, just took the man and threw it very quickly to the plate, which was legal in the National League at that time. But before the series, Judge Landis and the 2 presidents of the leagues had discussed the rules, and they agreed that the quick pitch was outlawed for the series, and the Cardinals knew that. Well, I think the umpire's name was Furman, and he said no pitch, and the Cardinals, they erupted because they thought Ruth had been struck out. And they came pouring out to yell at the umpire and all around him, and Huggins came out from the Yankee dugout to hold up the Yankee end of it, and Ruth just stood there. Ruth knew he was in the right. He just stood there with a big grin on his face watching the argument, didn't say a word. And when the argument was finished and the Cardinals lost it, Ruth applauded very mockingly. Boy, talk about flaunting things. And Sherdell got out on the mound, and Sherdell says, I'm going to get in there and hit you, big bum. And Ruth said, you put one in here. He said, and I'll hit it out of here. And years later he said, and Sherdell did, and I did. There it went. Call shot home run. He hit another home run, I think, at the 8th inning of that game. 3 home runs in one game, 2nd time. But he'd called the shots. We had a letter in Sports Illustrated from a man who was a kid, went to that ball game, sat in the left field stands, and he said people would boo Ruth cheerfully, and Ruth would go react to the crowd. And after he hit his 1st home run, he looked up at the crowd and he made a motion, meaning did another one next inning, and he hit another one. And then he did it a 3rd time. So he called in effect 2 home runs in the World Series. He'd called a shot in Boston in a regular league game a couple of years before, and a fan was on him yelling in this empty stadium because Boston didn't have any crowds then. And Ruth stepped out of the batter's box, looked at the guy, motioned to right field, hit a home run, and when he crossed home plate, he took his hat off and bowed. So the called shot was part of his repertoire. He said, I did that a lot. Sometimes I did it, and sometimes I didn't.
1928 was a breakout World Series for Lou Gehrig. He had his first ever World Series home run in Game 2, then added 2 more here in Game 3, and yet another in Game 4. His 9 RBIs set a new World Series record.
Who was the starting team back in those days? What was the Yankee? What was the 9? What was your starting team?
The starting team was Gehrig on first, Lazzeri on second, myself at shortstop, Joe Dugan at 3rd base, Ruth in right field, Coombs in center field, Musial in left field, and maybe Pennock pitching or Pipgrass or Hoyt.
Ready? Boys, on the 25th of February, 1929, we are in the city of St. Petersburg, one of the greatest cities in the world for training purposes. Training for getting in shape for one of the greatest races in the history of the American League. I'm sorry that Babe is not here this morning, but he's in Miami looking at the fight. Knowing that what he'd say anyhow and reference himself, which is that he's going to have one of the greatest years of his life. Gehrig, come here. Where are you? Where's Gehrig? Gehrig won't come.
Tell him Gehrig can't pitch no more for preliminary.
Well, but I know. But if he can't talk, he's going to lead the American League in hitting this year. And we'll be one of the hardest races for the rest of the clubs in the American League, 1929. How's that? Now let's go.
1929 started off on a bad note for the Yankees and only got worse. In January, Babe Ruth's wife, Helen, died in a house fire. She and the Babe had been separated for several years. By April, when the season started, the Yankees played mediocre, and it lasted all year long. They never challenged the Philadelphia Athletics, who went on to win the World Series. In late August, manager Miller Huggins took ill, but refused to see a doctor. By September, a large carbuncle had appeared on his face. Finally, in mid-September, weak and frustrated by his team's play, he agreed to check into a hospital. 5 days later, he was dead. The cause was blood poisoning. The Yankees were shocked.
For $80,000 for 2 years. Will you kindly sign your name?
All right, Colonel.
All right. That's fine, Ruth. Now I hope after that you'll have a successful year. And I hope you get back in your old shape again. And I hope you'll come through with a new home run record.
Over the years, many would claim that Babe Ruth stole the limelight from Lou Gehrig. In truth, Gehrig was incredibly shy and never embraced the media. Here, in rare footage from spring training of 1931, Gehrig, Ruth, and manager Joe McCarthy are asked to speak about the new, livelier ball that baseball is introducing.
All set.
Are you all set?
All set. I'm playing a little harder for him than I did last year. Well, Babe, could you talk about the new ball, what you going to do with this here, something like that?
Well, we don't know yet. We haven't had a chance to find it out. We've been playing in wind down here. When we get into a ground where there'll not be so much wind, well, then we can tell a little difference. I guess Lou knows the same thing about that himself. Don't you, boy?
That's the truth. That's one question. Maybe talk about training. Don't tell him about that rain down here, though. All right. I don't know. I can't see much difference in the new ball. Can you?
I haven't noticed much.
Have you, Babe?
Well, no. Well, that's what I said before. You got to depend on the wind. If we get in a quiet place, I think if there is any difference, you'll find it out that way.
I think so, too. Well,
is that all right?
I was with the Philadelphia Athletics in 1931. We won the pennant that year, too, but I had gone from the Yanks to Detroit to the Athletics, so I was pitching for Connie Mack and the Philadelphia Athletics against the Yankees, and I wanted to beat them so badly, you see. And this was Labor Day afternoon, and I was doing a very excellent job against them. I shut them out for 6 innings or something like this, and I got Ruth out and Gehrig out fairly well. I don't remember. They did get some hits, of course. But then it came down that somebody singled, and then finally Ruth came to bat with 1 or 2 men on, and I was pitching outside them because I wanted a high outside. I wanted him to hit the ball toward left field if he would. And you see, I can't do it. Well, I can stand up and do it this way, and Ruth would take this stance like this, you see, and he'd move in on every pitch, and when he'd move in, so I'd pitch him in here, and figuring if I can get the ball in here, he'll hit it on the handle and pop up. But his reflexes were so fast, you see, so I pitched him in here, and he got that bat around, and he used to use a 42-ounce bat, between 42 ounce and 48, one of the heaviest bats in the league. Now, behind the right field fence in Philadelphia, the old Philadelphia Park, was a street named J Street, if I'm not mistaken, and across that street, there's this line of Philadelphia houses with the little marble steps, and then the 2 floors high, and then backed up against that was another line of houses facing the other way, and then another street beyond. And Ruth hit that ball out of the park, over the first row of houses, over the second row of houses, and it landed in the second street beyond. And do you know that just like you turned your head, I turned my head like this, and I watched that ball going, and I thought to myself, my goodness. Oh, I used a different word than that, but I said, my goodness. How the heck can a guy hit a ball that far, and where is it going? And I watched that thing going, and I watched him running around. And then I suddenly realized he hit it off me, you know, and I remembered to be mad. But I mean, it was one of the longest home runs that I have ever seen hit by anybody, anywhere, at any time, any place. And so I have some kind of a distinction of some sort. But boy, he really blasted that one, and his reflexes at the plate was so quick, and that I admired the guy. Always have, always will.
In the spring of 1932, the Babe and his wife Claire give us a humorous glimpse into his training camp.
In 1932 was a much different season than 1927. By 1932, it was the height of the Depression, and the Roaring '20s were certainly a thing of the past. In '32, Mayor Jimmy Walker was forced out of office in a scandal. He had been a familiar face up at Yankee Stadium. Lindbergh baby was kidnapped in '32, and the Olympics were going on out on the West Coast in California. The Yankees wanted most of their stars, if not most of the players on the team, to take a pay cut in '32. And Ruth argued, he says, the Yankees say there's a depression, but I haven't seen any depression around here. So Ruth finally was cut, I think, from $80,000 to $75,000.
Sacco. It's push-em-up Tony Lazzari's turn at the home run business. And
on opening day in 1932, the Yankees hit 5 home runs, one of them by Ruth. They were playing the Athletics in Philadelphia. Athletics had just put together a dynasty. They had won 3 World Series in a row, and they were kind of the Yankees' rivals in the late 20s and early 30s for maybe the title of greatest team ever. The Yankees got off to a very hot start in April. I think they went 10-3. They wound up winning 107 ball games in 1932, 62-15 at Yankee Stadium. Certainly, they overwhelmed the league. They wound up beating the A's by 13 games that season.
Well, I've had 3 ambitions, and one was to play in 10 World Series. And it's just lucky. I think I'm a pretty fortunate fella to get in my 10th World Series. I think that's going to be a record to stand for a long time.
And so the Yankees figured to do very well in the World Series. Going into the World Series against the Cubs, they had a lot of reasons for revenge. Joe McCarthy, the new Yankee manager at 32, had previously managed the Cubs, and he was fired for only finishing second with the Cubs. For not actually, he finished first. McCarthy was fired for finishing first in the National League, but not winning the World Series. Cubs got rid of him and brought in Rogers Hornsby. So McCarthy wanted badly to beat the Cubs.
Well, Joe, I wish you all the success in the world with your new club. And I hope you'll finish on top, which I think you will. And we can meet together in the fall.
Thank you very much. And I hope that you get your wish and we meet one another in the fall. It'll give me great pleasure.
Nothing better. Thanks.
All right.
And the Yankees, during the 32 season, their shortstop, Koenig, had gone over to the Cubs, I should say, and he did well for them. He played about 30 or 40 games, but he was only voted a half share in the World Series, pay, even though he had helped them win the pennant. So the Yankees thought that this was cheap on the part of the Cubs, and Ruth hated people that were tight-fisted. Ruth, in his ways, he hated nobody worse than a guy who was stingy.
Yeah, they called them cheapskates and penny pinchers. Well, I joined them the last month and a half of the season, and I hit 358 or 59, I think, 359, and we were 6 games behind the St. Louis Cardinals when I joined them, and we overtook them, and I don't know, I had a great month and a half, you know. And I don't know why they voted me a half a share. I think that Wrigley should have made it up himself.
Yeah.
Wrigley should, a millionaire.
Now what happened? Babe Ruth heard about this in the newspaper and made fun of the Cubs.
Yeah, that's true. He called them all cheapskates. But I was on the train once, and Burley Grimes, the old pitcher, and Pat Malone was sitting there, and I heard them discussing that after we won the pennant, how they were going to split the money, you know. And they said, I heard them say that I should get a full share. Well, they were old time. Why didn't they get up in the meeting, you know, and talk for me?
So what happened in the World Series? Babe Ruth had made fun of them in the newspapers, so what'd they do? They started heckling Ruth from the dugout?
Oh, sure. They heckled Ruth. Oh, boy, and the Yankee bench, did they heckle us?
Newspapers came out by the thousands to shield people on the bleachers as rain threatened to stop the opening game of the World Series in Yankee Stadium. Second baseman of the Cubs batting. The single into center field, the first hit of the series. English, Cubs third baseman at bat, is 3-2. The long ball into right field. It's a nice hit. It goes right to the board. And Herman around third and pounds home for the first run of the series. English slides it at third, safe. Stevenson of Chicago batting. There's a nice poke to second base. The first single, and Woody English comes home. The score now is Cubs 2, New York nothing. Here's the base. Strike one. Guy Bush pitching for the Cubs. And he hit the ball to the goal for Charlie Quinn in the right field. Well, Holmes is coming home. That's the first Yankee run. Davis saved it first. Lou Gehrig batting. Here's a long fly ball in the right field. It's a homer into the stands. Babe Ruth jogging home. That puts the Yankees 1 run ahead of the Cubs.
In Game 2, Gehrig stole the show. Lou went 3 for 4, scoring twice. The Yankees coasted to a 5-2 victory behind the arm of Lefty Gomez. Here in the bottom of the third, a single by Chapman drives in Ruth and Gehrig.
So anyway, there was a lot of bickering and battling going on back and forth between the Yanks and the Cubs, And the Yankees kind of ran away with the first 2 games here in New York at Yankee Stadium. And the Cubs had walked a lot of batters, and most of them came around to score, and the Yankees had it all their way. And the Cubs were even more upset with the Yanks when they got them out in Chicago, talking back and forth and about Koenig and about they were giving Ruth a hard time, saying he was old, too heavy, couldn't swing anymore, couldn't play anymore. Ruth was 37 at the time, and the bench jockeying was about as worse as it ever got in baseball. It was more of a specialty in those days than it is nowadays, and they didn't have a players' union back then, and everybody was fighting for the paycheck.
Say, Lefty, you mentioned the 1932 Yankee Ball Club as perhaps the greatest you ever played on. Was 1932 the year the Yankees played the Chicago Cubs in the World Series, and the year that Babe Ruth was supposed to have pointed into the stands for a home run, called a shot?
Yes, Marty, that was in 1932. In fact, we were playing out in Chicago at Wrigley Field, and Babe did point and call a home run, because I remember sitting on the bench, and with 2 strikes and 2 balls, Babe pointed out, and then the next pitch he hit. I went into the bleachers, so I would definitely say, regardless of what anybody else talks about, that Babe did hit the home run after pointing.
You must have been plenty mad at those Chicago Cubs.
Well, there was a lot of ribbon going on between the 2 ball clubs, because if you remember, Mark Koenig had come back to the Cubs and was the spark plug of the team. They finally won the pennant, and Mark had a good year, and they voted him in a share of the World Series. And so that's what we were all riding the Cubs about, and naturally, it got to be a little rugged at times, but we were fortunate enough to outscore them, so we beat them.
The Babe is the heavy in a feud between the Yankees and the Cubs. At the station, angry Chicago fans boo and nearly mob him. The squabble is carried into Wrigley Field, but not officially, as the festivities get underway.
The newsreel cameras capture Ruth's at-bat in the top of the first. Cubs catcher Gabby Harnett yells in frustration at his pitcher Charlie Root. There are Yankees on first and second with none out when Ruth smashes a homer into the right field bleachers. And quickly, the Cubs are down 3 runs. Top of the 5th, the newsreel cameras capture Ruth's famous called shot home run, a blast to center field. As Ruth rounds first, he gestures and yells over at the Chicago dugout. And he does it again as he heads towards third. The newsreel cameras had failed to catch the moments before Babe Ruth's called shot home run. Was he motioning with his arm at the Chicago dugout? Pitcher Charlie Root, or gesturing towards center field and predicting a brash home run? It is the most controversial moment in baseball history. But there was one camera that captured the entire at-bat. It was a spring-wound Kodak in the hands of a Chicago printer named Matt Campbell. The film sat packed away in the family basement for 60 years till Matt's great-grandson, Kurt Kandel, discovered it. Here, Matt captured the opening ceremonies. These were the days before Wrigley Field had its trademark ivy growing on the outfield wall. The Cub players march behind the band, holding an outstretched flag. Here you can glimpse into the Yankee dugout. As Ruth comes to the plate in the first inning, we freeze the picture to point out Charlie Root on the mound and the Cubs dugout off to the third base side. noticed the photographer just feet away from Ruth as the first pitch is thrown. A single and a walk resulted in Earl Coombs on second and Joel Sewell on first with none out and Ruth at the plate. After Charlie Root fell behind 2-0, Ruth smashed the next pitch into the right field bleachers. As Ruth rounds the bases, he passes the Cubs dugout without gesturing. Notice as he crosses home plate, Gehrig congratulates him with a slap on the back. Matt's camera captures Lou Gehrig rounding the bases after homering in the top of the third to give the Yankees a 4-1 lead. Matt's daughter Gladys looks on anxiously, hoping her Cubs can come back. And in the bottom of the third, Kiki Kyler's home run cuts the Yankee lead to 4-3. The next inning, the Cubs would tie the score after Ruth missed a shoestring catch.
At one point during the 32 series, when they first got out to Chicago, not only were the players getting on Ruth, but it was even the trainer, Andy Lotshaw of the Cubs. He called to Ruth, "Hey, you old potbelly, if I had you, I'd hitch you to a wagon." Well, Ruth later on said, never minded the players yelling at him, calling him all sorts of names. He said, but when the trainer cut in, he says, that made him sore. Game 3 of the World Series was probably one of the greatest games in World Series history. Ruth had come up in the first inning and hit a 3-run homer, gave the Yankees a quick 3-0 lead. And then Gehrig hit a homer later on, it made it 4-0. Cubs rallied to tie the game at 4-4. Then in the 5th inning, that's when all the fireworks started. That's when Ruth hit his called shot home run. As he crossed the plate after hitting that home run, he pointed to Gehrig and said, "You do the same thing, kid." And Gehrig did exactly that, hit a home run. People forget. They remember Ruth's shot, but not Gehrig's.
What happened in that famous story? Describe to me that day. Where were you? Were you playing out in the field?
No, you mean when Ruth hit the home run?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was sitting on the bench. And I actually didn't see him point. They had 2 strikes on him. A guy would be nuts against a pitcher like Ruth to say, point and say, I'm going to hit the next ball in the center field, over the center field fence. I think he just raised his hand to say, I got 2 strikes on me, see? But naturally, the sporting writers, boy, they snatched on that, huh?
But what did he mean if he put in his hand for 2 strikes, meaning I still have...
Yeah, still got 1 strike to go. Yeah, sure.
When Ruth came up during Game 3 in Chicago, this is the game when he hit his famous cold shot home run, the Cubs were really razzing him, getting on him when he came up the second time. I think it was in the 5th inning. And they, at one point, even rolled a couple of lemons out on the field and calling Ruth all sorts of names. And Ruth was pointing to the dugout, pointing out to the pitcher, warning everybody, telling the Cubs this and that. And that's how the legend of the cold shot actually got started, with all the finger pointing. And thereafter, Ruth, I think he had 2 strikes on him at the time, and he held up 2 fingers to show the Cubs in the dugout. That's 2 strikes. I've got 1 more. And he turned and he pointed toward the pitcher and did somewhat the same thing, only he had his hand about waist high from what you can tell on film and from eyewitness descriptions. And he pointed to the pitcher and according to Gehrig, said, I'm going to knock the next pitch down your throat. Well, he certainly had pointed out toward the pitcher, out toward center field, and warned people that he was going to do something. The fans could see it, the players could see it, and that's what he did. Hit the next pitch, home run, center field. It's the most famous homer ever and the most controversial.
And here is the famous called shot at bat, as filmed by Matt Campbell.
watch it again in slow motion, remember the Cubs dugout is off to the left. Is Ruth pointing to center field or gesturing towards the Cubs bench, which is razzing him about missing a shoestring catch just minutes earlier? After a called strike, the two quick gestures towards the pitcher. And when Ruth connected, it was a blast to dead center field and the furthest home run that had ever been hit in Wrigley Field.
Took his arm and elevated it like this up over Charlie Root's head. Now I've heard people say that no, Babe was pointing at Charlie Root. Well, he wasn't, because I was at ground level. I wasn't in a dugout that day. Babe had me in a box seat right alongside the Yankee dugout. I was at ground level, and I saw specifically Babe raise his arm like that. Now I could have seen had it been level like this with Charlie Root's head. It was level. It was pointed up over Charlie Root's head. Next pitch came in, and wham, he hit it out to center field bleachers, and at that time it was the longest home run ever seen in Wrigley Field. A lot of people don't realize or know that they took Charlie Root out as the pitcher, and they put in a relief pitcher. I don't recall his name, but he came in. Of course, the next fellow up in the lineup was Lou Gehrig. Babe hit third, and Gehrig hit fourth. Lou Gehrig came in, hit behind Babe, and hit a home run in the same spot where Babe had. They hit back-to-back home runs. Oh yes, it was just before the fourth pitch, which was a ball, make it 2-2. He had yelled out to Charlie Root, and I heard this plainly. It only takes one. Then the ball come in, 2 balls, 2 strikes. That's when he pointed up over Charlie Root. Yeah, he said it only takes one.
And finally, Matt Campbell's camera captures the end of the game as disappointed Cub fans gather on the field. Cubs were down 3-0, and the series was all but over. In Ruth's first at-bat, he's hit by a pitch. He yells and gestures at pitcher Guy Bush. Although Babe hit 2 dramatic home runs, Lou Gehrig was the most productive player of the series. He batted .529 with 9 hits, 3 home runs, and 8 RBIs in only 4 games. Here in the 6th inning, Gehrig's single drives in 2, giving the Yanks the lead for good. And here's how a newsreel montage remembers Game 4.
And now we'll turn to chapter number 4. 50,000 Chicago rooters getting the thrill of their lives as Demery clears the bases with a mighty homer in the Cubs' last stand against fate. Chicago's big moment in the series. The storm signal again. Mr. Gehrig has hit a double, and another Yankee whirlwind's brewing. Sacco. It's push-em-up Tony Lazzari's turn at the home run business, and curtains for the Cubs. The Yanks pile up 19 hits for a 13-6 victory, top the championship in 4 straight, making 12 consecutive victories in World Series games. Some ball club, mates.
Here in 1935, Ruth reflects on his career and the famous called shot.
I'm going to say friends because the Boston public has shown me that there have been friends. For 21 years, 6 of them I spent in Boston. I enjoyed those 6 years. It hurt me worse than it did you folks to leave Boston those days. But going to New York for 15 years, which I've served under Colonel Rupert, I can't say that I have to forget New York entirely. They have been wonderful to me, and they've showed their loyalty also. But I will say that I've had thrills before, a number of them. Something like hitting a home run in Chicago that time. The Lord was with me when I called the shots. If he hadn't been with me, why, it'd have been just too bad.
And here the newsreel companies edit Ruth's first at-bat and fifth at-bat together to make up for what they had missed.
Well, after this one particular time when I went to bat, Charlie Ruth was pitching. And the first pitch ball was a called strike. Well, I thought it was outside and didn't like it very much. So the boys over there would give me this, on you. Well, the second pitch ball was another call strike. Well, I didn't like that one either, so I let it go by. Well, I stepped out of the box, and by that time, they were over there going crazy. Well, I looked out at center field, and I implored him. I said, I'm going to hit the next pitch ball right past the flagpole. Well, the good Lord must have been with me.